I'd like to say a quick thank you to everybody who may be tuning in, and I hope this little Devo this evening will be beneficial to everyone who might be listening. Continuing on in the theme of genuine faith, looking at the book of James. We'll be looking at James chapter 4, verses 14 and 15 primarily, for those who have their Bibles with them and would like to follow along. Looking at those two verses there and talking about genuine faith, the topic that I see protruding there is that of trusting in the Lord. It's that of trusting in God and not trusting in our own wills, what we believe may be to happen. When we look all through the scriptures, we see that God has known from the beginning and continues to know until the end of time everything that will transpire, everything that will take place. But when it comes to man's knowledge, man doesn't know what will happen one day or the next. And so when we're talking about genuine faith, when we're talking about genuine faith in God, a key proponent to that is trusting in God. I'd like to read those couple verses here real quick. And we'll start in verse 13 to get the full thought there. It says, "Come now, you who will say today or tomorrow, we will go to such and such a city, spend a year there, buy and sell, and make a profit." Verse 14, "Whereas you do not know what will happen tomorrow, for what is your life? It is even a vapor that appears for a little time and then vanishes away. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we shall live and do this or that." So looking at verse 14 there, we see what is unknown to man. Verse 14, it says, "Whereas you do not know what will happen tomorrow." Man doesn't even know what will happen today. We can make plans as much as we want. We can say that we're going to do this or we're going to do that, and that very well may take place. But we don't know what may happen in the seconds, the minutes, the hours, whatever it may be between the current moment in time and that's about to take place. We could be sitting here doing this Devo this evening or listening to this Devo, and within an hour from now, something terrible, something drastic could happen, or something blessed could happen, and the Lord could return. We have no control over that. I can plan that when I'm done here, I'll go back to my apartment. I'll spend the evening in whatever I'm going to be doing. I'll go to bed. I'll wake up in the morning and just go on about my life. But there's no control that I have over whether or not those things will actually happen. It's unknown to me, just as the things that happen in our lives are unknown to all people. Man lacks the power to control what will happen one day to another, what will happen throughout the entirety of one's life. We can look at a great example of being Job. Looking at Job chapters 38 and 39, God is addressing Job and saying, "Where were you when this happened? Or do you have control over this? Can you do this? Can you do that?" God had control over it all. God knew what was going to happen, but Job had no control. Job was a faithful man, and yet he was encountered with all these trials, with all these things that tested his faith. He had no control over any of it. He could only strive to remain faithful to the Lord in everything he did. And that's the way we should be today. We should strive to remain faithful with every breath that we take, with everything that we do, because we don't have any control over when our last breath will be, or who we may encounter that will threaten us in some way. And things could either start going better for us spiritually, things could go worse for us spiritually, things could go better for us or worse for us physically. We don't know what would happen. And looking at the example of Job there, that's what we see. Psalm 103 in verse 15, as well as 1 Peter chapter 1 in verse 24, says man's life is a vapor. We see that also in James chapter 4 here, where it says in verse 14, "For what is your life? It is even a vapor that appears for a little time and then vanishes away." We have no control over when our physical life will diminish from this physical existence, when our lives here will be done. And so we have no control over what we're going to do tomorrow unless the Lord wills that we live through tomorrow. And that's where it says in Scripture that one ought to say, when it comes to verse 15, one ought to say, if the Lord wills, we shall live and do this or that. You know, when I was growing up, there was an older lady in the congregation, and this is something that she would always say. Every Sunday, it seemed like, it never failed that I would hear her say this at one point or another, with one thing or another. She would say, well, this is my plans for the week, or we'll meet up on Wednesday, Lord willing. And that's the mindset that every Christian should have. If it's the Lord's will, we'll do this. And we can grow our faith. We can have a more genuine faith in doing that, in trusting the Lord and trusting His will, and not relying on ourselves, not relying on what our will is, on what we desire to do, or what we desire to have happen. We need to trust in the Lord and rely on Him. Looking at verse 15 there, it is known to God. Everything that happens in this world, that happens in this life, everything that's happened before this world, before this life, and after, is known to God. He's known everything that has been and will ever be since the beginning. Since before time was even a matter, God has known. All things happen according to His will. Ephesians chapter 1 and verse 11. All things happen according to the will of God. All things happen according to God's plan. And we need to learn to trust that plan as people. Because in the shadow of God, we're insignificant. We have no control over what may happen. But God knows what will happen. You know, that's where it comes into play for a lot of people. People have lost their faith over things like deaths in the family or traumatic events that may have happened. But we need to learn to rely on the Lord, because whatever it may be that happens, all things happen for His glory. I mean, even look at examples of the nation of Israel in the Old Testament. There were times when that nation was completely decimated, almost completely wiped out. And surely in those days, people were thinking, how could this be for the glory of God? The people that are called His people are being destroyed, are being wiped out. But after all that was said and done, these people, the remnant of these people, became faithful. And that's how it is sometimes today. Sometimes through trials, people become more faithful, and God is given the glory. You know, how many times have we seen examples, in whether it be in the news or whatever it may be? You know, there's been at least a couple times I can recall where someone may have lost a family member to a shooting or something like that. And then when the case is progressing, they say that they forgive that person because that's what they believe is God's will. That's what they believe is the right thing to do. And God has given the glory in that. Even that death of a family member, God has given the glory. And surely if in something as drastic as that, God can be praised, then surely God can be praised in every day of our life. And we can say, if it's God's will, if it's the Lord's will, we'll do this or we'll do that. As it says here in the passage that we're looking at, it says, we'll go to such and such a city, spend a year there, buy, sell, and make profit. Again, we can make plans all we want, but it needs to be trusting in the Lord's will, because we don't know if those things will ever take place. It's God's will whether or not they will. It's out of our control. Looking further, we see God's life is eternal. Whereas man's life is a vapor, God's life is eternal. It is a rock. It is solid throughout every storm, throughout every trial. God's life, God's eternality is a rock. And it's something that we can hold on to, something that we can anchor ourselves on in order to be delivered through this life, if we trust in the Lord. If we trust that our anchor will hold when it's hooked onto Him and not hooked onto some vanishing thing of this world. Psalm 90 in verse 2, as well as Hebrews chapter 7 in verse 3 says this. It says that God is eternal. And we need to face those facts, to get over the pride of ourselves, to not be like those that we see examples of in Scripture, those like the people who built the Tower of Babel. thinking that they could build a tower into the heavens, or whoever it may have been, going through the scriptures. There's so many people that leave God's side because they don't think they need the Lord. They trust in themselves. They trust in the physicalness of this world. And they lose sight of the eternality of God. They lose sight of being faithful to the only solid rock in anyone's life. No matter what may happen, the things of this world will pass. But if we hold on to God, we'll always be secure. I hope that something of this has been of help, of benefit to someone, and there will be ways that you can get in contact. If anyone is looking for prayers, is searching for truth, I hope that we can aid you on that walk, trying to grow closer with Christ and growing that genuine faith.